Hi everyone, it's Jen Alvey, and I am going to be doing this week's Life, Not Death, Going Deeper video. And the reason I'm doing it is because I am particularly passionate about these topics that I'll be discussing. So we thought it was appropriate for me to do the Going Deeper. So to begin, the commandment, thou shalt not kill, in Hebrew, it actually translates to thou shalt not murder. And there is a big difference between kill and murder. The word kill is taking any life, human or animal, taking a human life deliberately or by accident, illegally or legally, immorally or morally, okay? And then on the other hand, the word murder is just the illegal or immoral taking of a human life. So when we discuss this commandment, in part one, we talked a lot about peace and how holding on to anger can be types of killing of the spirit and things like that, promoting peace, promoting life. And in this part, we're certainly talking about the illegal and immoral taking of a human life. So I'm going to discuss the topics of abortion, euthanasia, suicide, and touch upon capital punishment. And now I want to make very clear that I recognize how difficult these topics are and certainly how controversial they are, but the difficulty of them, and no matter how controversial they are in our modern world, it does not negate the truth of what the Catholic Church teaches about the sacredness of life. And I also recognize that some of us may have been affected by some of these things. And I realize that can be tough. That can be tough to hear someone talk about. It can be tough to think about. And with that, I want to remind you of God's great forgiveness, love, and mercy for us if we seek that forgiveness, love, and mercy. So moving forward, I'm first going to start with abortion. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states that human life must be respected and protected from the moment of conception. From the first moment of his or her existence, a human must be recognized as having the rights of a person, among which is the inviolable right of every innocent being to life. I referenced John Paul II's encyclical in Evangelium Vitae, and he references the incomparable worth of the human person, and that life is a sacred reality entrusted to us, to be preserved with a sense of responsibility and brought to perfection in love and in the gift of ourselves. So in that, we recognize that the sacredness of life, and sometimes that means that we have to die to ourselves in order to give life to someone else. We have to set our own things, our own expectations aside in order to bring life forth. Haley touched on it about how Christians are meant to be a people of peace. And it's true, we are called to be a people of peace. But if we're supposed to remain consistent in that, there's no arbitrary line where peace begins. Peace begins right in the womb. If we can't start there, it's going to be a mess everywhere else. Moving on to euthanasia. Again, this is tough, I know. So from the Catechism, paragraph 2276, Those whose lives are diminished or weakened deserve special respect. Sick or handicapped persons should be helped to lead lives as normal as possible. And then paragraph 2277 goes on to say that whatever its motives and means, direct euthanasia consists in putting an end to the lives of handicapped, sick, or dying persons. It's morally unacceptable. And we're seeing this creep up more and more in our modern times, aren't we? You know, we see this idea of death with dignity, and we think because we're told, you know, the world really asserts this idea that it is compassionate to allow, you know, an elderly person, someone who's terribly sick, someone who's handicapped, to allow them to euthanize themselves. We think that it's compassionate to let them decide how they die. And it's hard. It's really hard to kind of fight against what the world is telling us. But really, I mean, the Catholic Church is very, very countercultural, okay? This compassion that the world puts forth is a gravely false compassion, especially in the terms of abortion and euthanasia. You know, we see the woman in a crisis pregnancy and we think it's compassionate to lead them to an abortion clinic. We see someone who's ill, someone who's old, and we think it's compassionate to usher them to perhaps an early death. This is false compassion. True compassion is bearing this person's suffering along with them. And now, I could go on and on about why we suffer and how suffering has so much meaning, but I won't. So I'm just going to leave it at true compassion is suffering with someone else. It's bearing someone else's burden with them so that their load is a little bit lighter. Moving on to suicide. Again, it's another hard one. The Catechism says, "It is God who remains the sovereign master of life. We are stewards, not owners, of the life God has entrusted to us." I want to pause there, and I just want you to think about, we are stewards, not owners, of the life God has entrusted to us. Our life is not our own, so it is not ours to dispose of. Suicide contradicts that idea and the natural inclination of the human being to preserve and perpetuate his life. With this said, the Catechism also recognizes that grave psychological disturbances, anguish, or grave fear of hardship, suffering, or torture can diminish the responsibility of the one committing suicide. We should not despair of the eternal salvation of persons who have taken their own lives. By ways known to Him alone, God can provide the opportunity to salutary repentance. Salutary repentance is repentance even after death. And the Church also prays for persons who have taken their own lives. Moving on to capital punishment. Under certain circumstances, it can be morally justified for the taking of another human life. In self-defense, in times of war, and in times past, capital punishment. But John Paul II states that capital punishment, the circumstances in which capital punishment can be justified really don't exist in our modern world. There's always the possibility of life without parole, and that is generally preferred to the taking of the life of even a guilty person. And so back to that sort of consistent life ethic that I referred to earlier, you know, from conception to natural death, even for the most guilty person, their life is still sacred. That is still a member of God's family, even though they have broken that communion, right, by doing something awful. It is not in our hands, in a human's hands, to take the life of another. So with that, not only does this commandment say, thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not murder, but it also promotes a culture of life. And so as you go forward into your discussions, I want you to think about that and how can you further promote a culture of life. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.